I like to think that I was a hardcore Bitcoiner before I even knew what Bitcoin was. So many of the values that I have come to appreciate about Bitcoin are values that are super important to me anyway. Sovereignty, hard money, accountability, responsibility. I'm an estate planning attorney by background. That's what I've done for 2.5 decades. I spent the better part of a decade where my primary responsibility was teaching other attorneys how different legal strategies work, how different jurisdictions apply tax law, asset protection, privacy, and that kind of stuff. And one of the attorneys that I had taught some of those strategies to ended up with a ultra high net worth client who just happened to have 9 figures worth of Bitcoin back in 2017.
How do you envision the role of family offices evolving? What new skills do they need to stay relevant in this changing landscape?
They really need to take this asset class seriously for sure. I mean, we're at the beginning edge of the largest wealth transfer in human history. As baby boomers die and pass their wealth to millennials and Gen X, there are trillions upon trillions of dollars changing hands. The inheritors are not really interested in the wealth management strategies that grandma and grandpa had.
Yeah.
They are all about Web3.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, It's just a different era, a different group of people that are comfortable with the internet and the technologies of the internet and what it enables.
Yeah.
I mean,
our 2 biggest philanthropy projects that we're helping to manage are both with mega Bitcoin holders. And one of them has a real heart to help people be kind of drawn out of human trafficking, whether it's sex trafficking or work trafficking or whatever. And so that client has put about $40 million worth of Bitcoin into building a brick and mortar that's fully staffed to help people in California that have been trafficked. And they provide education, they provide services, and they're literally pulling people off of the streets, helping them become equipped for jobs, and then sending them out in the workforce. And that would not happen but for Bitcoin.
Wow. Welcome back to another episode of CypherPunk'd. Today, we're excited to welcome a true innovator in wealth management and crypto, Matt McClintock. As founder and executive managing director of the Bespoke Group, Matt brings over 20 years of experience in estate planning and wealth preservation for ultra-affluent clients. But what sets him apart is his pioneering work in navigating the unique challenges of crypto assets, aligning wealth strategies with values like sovereignty, freedom, and decentralization. From estate planning to bridging digital and traditional finance, Matt's insights are invaluable for anyone looking to understand the future of wealth in the crypto age. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Matt. Appreciate it.
So I see a lot of gray hairs on that face.
Oh, man. Dude,
you've been around a while, man.
Dude, yeah, I'm an old dog. I'm an old dog. Yeah.
So, how did you get involved with Bitcoin? What led you to Bitcoin? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that I was a hardcore Bitcoiner before I even knew what Bitcoin was. And what I mean by that is that so many of the values that I have come to appreciate about Bitcoin are values that are super important to me anyway. This idea of sovereignty, hard money, accountability, responsibility, and Bitcoin really embodies all of that for me. And my background, as you mentioned in the intro, I'm an estate planning attorney by background. That's what I've done for 2.5 decades. I spent the better part of a decade where my primary responsibility was teaching other attorneys how different legal strategies work, how different jurisdictions apply tax law, asset protection, privacy, and that kind of stuff. One of the attorneys that I had taught some of those strategies to ended up with a ultra high net worth client who just happened to have 9 figures worth of Bitcoin back in 2017. And that attorney reached out to me and said, "Hey, will you help me design the strategies for this family?" Because, that's what I do, is really kind of complicated wealth strategy structuring. And I said, "I don't know anything about Bitcoin. In fact, I don't think I'd even heard the word in 2017. And I was that far, under a rock."
Wow.
And so I said, "Well, I'll kind of start looking into it, see what I can find." And, we're sitting here in 2024. 2017 feels like a long, long time ago. But if you think about it, the news about Bitcoin wasn't really great in 2017. Mm-hmm. We were just coming out of the block size wars. There have been a couple of hard forks that year. Things were really acrimonious. The Silk Road had just been wound down. Mt. Gox was only 3 years in the rearview mirror. So there's all kinds of bad news about Bitcoin. And I was thinking, I don't know that I want to go down this road because this is just weird. Mm-hmm. And what is this digital asset thing anyway? But I said, out of a favor to my friend who had teed this thing up. I said, well, I'll go sit down with these folks and kind of hear their story, see what the deal is. And drove up to Boulder from my office in just outside Denver, and was fascinated by this family. Super cool people, hardcore libertarians, hardcore Misesians, and as much as anything else, they were very understanding about my ignorance about Bitcoin, and to a certain degree my not really antipathy, but my concerns about Bitcoin at the time. And they're just really walking me kind of through what it is and how it works. And I was fascinated by them, fell in love with this couple, and really wanted to do some work with them. But as my business partner and I were driving back to our office, he was saying, I don't think we want to touch this because this is just like, we don't know anything about this. And I said, no, I said quite the contrary. I said, you're dealing with a family that has $150 million worth of wealth. And they had gone through several other attorneys to that point, and nobody was doing the hard work to figure out what Bitcoin was. And so I said, the answer cannot be that there is an asset out there that is so complicated that nobody's going to touch it. So we're going to figure this out. And so we started the journey. That was our Bitcoin rabbit hole moment. It was November of 2017. And kind of long story short, we ended up doing a ton of structured legal work for them through our law firm. And they were thrilled with the work that we did. A couple of different types of strategies that we might get into if you want to go down that trail a little bit. But then at the end of the engagement in February of 2018, their question was, can we pay you in Bitcoin? I said, well, the answer has to be yes.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, the answer has to be yes. Yeah. So we took our first, it was a significant payment, 6 figures worth of a fee, on-chain paid in Bitcoin was our first Bitcoin transaction back in February of 18. And then because of the relationships we had built with those clients, they said, well, hey, can you help us manage other stuff? Can you help us manage real estate portfolios? Can you help us facilitate multi-sig? I didn't even know what multi-sig was, but I said, yeah, we'll figure that out too.
Yeah.
Can you help us work with our tax attorney, with our tax accountants and stuff? So the answer was just yes, 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 yes. We'd keep doing this stuff. And so they kept paying us on Bitcoin, which is great. And then because of my background and my business partner's background in education, I started teaching other attorneys, CPAs, trust officers and stuff like that, what Bitcoin is, how it works, what private keys are, how you find price discovery on these assets, how they're taxed from a tax perspective, how you structure these things through various trusts or other legal devices in order to get certain outcomes. And one thing kind of led to the next. And rather than those attorneys and other professionals kind of learning the work and doing the work, they learned it and then sent all the work to me.
Yeah. No, again, you had a fantastic, talk at the Naples Symposium conference. And one thing that you said really stood out to me. You said that, not knowing or not, like, it's not an acceptable answer just to say we don't do that, right? It's like, we're going to figure that out, right?
Yeah,
that really, struck me because I have other businesses and things, and you get people that are just like, oh, that's not my job, or whatever. It's like, no, that's your fucking job.
Yeah,
what I mean?
I think it's a profound,
show some. I don't know what the word is, but show some incentive to show some. What's the word I'm looking for here?
Initiative, I think maybe
that's the word. Yeah.
And I think, this world is about the only world I know, the wealth management and estate planning world. I think there is a profound lack of curiosity among attorneys. I'm kind of throwing stones in my own glass house maybe sometimes, but I think there's a profound lack of curiosity among wealth managers, among other like traditional financial service professionals.
To me, that blows my mind.
Yeah.
Just because if you look at Bitcoin's 15-year history, Bitcoin is the best performing asset in all of human history.
Hands down.
How can you not be curious about that? If your job is wealth management, how can you not be curious about the best performing asset in human history? It just blows my mind.
I'm not going to give these jokers a pass. However, I think this is an explanation more of an excuse. I've wrestled with that too, Maddie, and I think it is by and large because they don't have to.
Yeah.
Because, the big boys out there, the big incumbents, they've got billions and billions and billions of dollars.
On their laurels.
Exactly. It's like, we have to deal with this Bitcoin bull crap. It's like, who cares? It's like, it's terrorist money.
Would you get bored of your job though? It's like you deal with the same shit every day. It's like, hey, there's this new like shiny thing that we can at least investigate, look into. I mean, even you don't have to make a serious allocation in anybody's portfolio, but like 1%, sub 1%, 0.5%. You know what I mean? Like, come on. Like, why not?
Now you're messing with their golf game. They got like a tea time at 3:00. So it's like, again, that's a lack of curiosity because I mean, for me,
silly.
You have to have a passion about what you do. I think no matter what it is, you have to be fired up about what you do. And I think that's one of the things, again, kind of the merging of my natural bias with the Bitcoin world. It's like, I have yet to meet a complacent person in the Bitcoin space.
Yeah.
That's like, whether they're doing mining, whether they're doing trade facilitation, whether they're doing, there are a few wealth managers and other people in the Bitcoin space, but it's like Bitcoiners, and even kind of into some of the thinner branches of the crypto space. It's like, they're like all in. It's like it's a community and a society of
people
itself.
Like myself is here. I mean, we're doing this because we love it's like you said when you first you felt like you were a Bitcoiner before you were a Bitcoiner, right?
Yeah, right.
It was like when I was first introduced to Bitcoin, and a lot of people are like your partner or whoever, even yourself, right? When you first come, you're like, oh, this is like some kind of Ponzi scheme, scam type of all this for criminals or whatever. Like that's like kind of the first impression that people have, and then it's like once you start peeling back that onion, you're like, holy shit, this hard money aspect, game theory, decentralization, no one central authority controls anything. Like, this is a powerful idea.
You can't make more of it. You can't make it any faster. 10 minutes from now, you'll have another 3 1/8, and that's it. It's like,
that's built into this thing, and like the idea of public and private keys and all these different things. Like, oh my God, this is like amazing. And you keep peeling back, and once you think you've peeled back that last layer, boom, another layer pops up, right?
100%.
The big one for myself was this idea of, and we see it even now, government's just spending and printing and wasting and doing all these things, stealing, from people. Essentially was what it is, right? You're printing money. You're stealing people's purchasing power that they've worked and that they've saved. They poured their life energy into something and been compensated for that with this dollar bill, this piece of paper, essentially. And then, the government just comes and prints it. Grandma puts it in her savings account. And, after 10 years, grandma's purchasing power is cut in half, right?
Yeah,
she has no idea what even happened to her, right?
Because she was saving diligently.
Yeah.
She expected,
I want to give my grandkids a college education or whatever, right? And then so you peel back all these layers, and like the one thing for me was this idea of like, hey, no more, like, wars will still happen, but there's no endless printer to just keep the wars going, to steal from the population. Like, hey, there's going to be some real accountability here going forward for governments, for people, et cetera, et cetera. Right?
Well, let's hope so.
That's for me is the biggest thing. Is like, hey, there's this quote, cypherpunks write code, essentially, right? But cypherpunks also need to put the message out there, explain to people why privacy is important, why Bitcoin is important, why all these things matter, right? Because in the public conversation, it's really not there. Nobody has a clue.
Right.
People are just kind of lulled to sleep, and this is how it is. This is how it's always going to be. You know what I mean? But that's not the case if you look at history. Things change. Time changes. We move along.
Well, the privacy aspect is a huge component of it, and I'm afraid to a very real degree, the genie is out of the bottle. Privacy is probably one of my biggest hot button issues.
Yeah,
because we got my iPhone here. See, you've got yours there, and we've got social media, all these companies. It's like, we have given away our right to privacy in exchange for trinkets, for free services and stuff like that, because the terms of service on these on these applications that we use, like, well, they've got the right to all of this information. It's like Google is going to take your information and plow that right back through. OpenAI,
worst.
OpenAI is taking all your search queries, and that's their proprietary information, and so we have to work around the edges for privacy. And when we're dealing with clients with significant wealth, a lot of what we're trying to do through the legal structures is reclaiming some privacy so they can own homes, own other assets, have business exits, enjoy their wealth in a way that's inconspicuous, in a way that is just not just out there for the whole world to see. One of the things I really get wrapped around the axle about, which probably not enough people know about. I've done a fair bit of writing about this and talking about this, but there's this Corporate Transparency Act. I don't know if you've followed this at all. But the
I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah,
but
I mean it's
total violation.
It's the most egregious. It's the most egregious violation of Americans' Fourth Amendment privacy rights that we've seen. I mean,
my take is it's unconstitutional. That's my take.
I think it's unconstitutional. A judge in Alabama agrees with us.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see if it goes up to the Supreme Court and if they take it up. I'm cautiously optimistic that the composition of the Supreme Court is currently such that they would find this to be unconstitutional, but it kind of depends on what their incentives are. But as a quick TLDR for the audience, the Corporate Transparency Act was ushered in under the Defense Authorization Act of 2020, I think, and it was tacked to must-pass legislation. So the Corporate Transparency Act, when it was first floated in Congress, died in committee.
They always do this. They just attach this crap to one giant bill, call it the Save the Puppies Act. Meanwhile,
exactly, because exactly, and so it died in committee the first time around.
Yeah.
But then in 2020, when it's a presidential election year, and they attach it to a Defense Authorization Act, do you want to be the member of Congress that's out there campaigning for re-election to say, I voted against the...
It's criminal what they get away with, man.
Yeah, it's like, so they attach this to must-pass legislation. Yeah. So then we get this Corporate Transparency Act that then forces all of the small businesses here in Naples, all across the United States, whether they're set up for running mining operations, running podcast operations, running businesses like mine, or just managing private money, just a family managing private money. Under most circumstances, those entities must now file with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network Department of the Treasury. And the very insinuation to me that if they don't suspect ordinary Americans to be violating the law and laundering money, why is it a registry with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network? Yeah. You are guilty until you establish your own innocence.
Blatant violation of the Fourth Amendment.
So a lot of what we do, we do is...
But the thing is, they get away with this stuff. I mean,
that's right. There's no accountability for
the Patriot Act. I mean, you've got...
Oh, gosh, yeah.
We either have a constitutional republic and the Constitution matters or it doesn't. Right. I mean, it's like you've got judges in New York City and some of these corrupt places where it's like they swear an oath to the Constitution. I know I've mentioned this before, probably on this podcast, but judge swears an oath to uphold the Constitution and then goes and says the Second Amendment doesn't exist in my courtroom.
Right.
It's like, how do you still have your license? I mean, this is the supreme law of the land. You're corrupt, right? I don't know other way to go about it, right? I don't know. It's crazy to me.
Well, I think. I've got this is something I really get wrapped around the axle about, and I think there's not enough accountability for justices, for judges. I think this is another rabbit trail we may want to even cut out. I don't know, but
no,
it's like
about whatever.
This whole idea that a Supreme Court justice and a federal judge is appointed to a lifetime appointment. Once they get confirmed, they're appointed for life. There's no more accountability. And you can technically impeach them for high crimes and misdemeanors, but that literally never happens. And so they get this job where there's no accountability. I would love to see an amendment to the Constitution that brought in term limits on federal judges. It could be a long term. It could be 20 years. Get them outside the political cycle.
Yeah.
But it's like once you're appointed, once you're confirmed, clock is running. After 20 years, you're done.
I think that's reasonable. I mean, I don't see anything unreasonable about that. I mean, you do want them outside of the 4-year political presidential thing. So that's important that they maybe have longer terms than that. But no, I think that's perfectly reasonable.
When these lifetime appointments were kind of codified in the U.S. Constitution, the average age, like the average mortality age,
was 55. Or something.
Maybe even
50.
So you stretch it out like in the 60s, maybe, because I know Washington was 70, Jefferson was in his 70s, something like that. So it's like that wasn't unheard of, but it's like now we're easily clocking into the 80s and 90s, and it's just like, do we really need to have a bunch of sclerotic octogenarians making the law, interpreting the law, where there's no accountability for them? I'd love to see some changes made.
Yeah. I mean, it would. It's sad to see when they don't follow the Constitution, which is, what they're sworn to uphold. That's when it's like, just, the most blatant things, like just saying stuff like the Second Amendment doesn't exist in my courtroom, or, the First Amendment, we're going to like switch it up here and we're going to modify it. Or, it's just like crazy talk,
Yeah, we have our own fiefdoms, so we're going to have
crazy. These are like, part of a constitutional republic is you have these rights, and the founding fathers thought through this. They studied hundreds and thousands of years of government and history, and put all these ideas together to codify and create this document. And there was a lot of thought that went into it. And, like anything, nothing is ever perfect, but the ethos of, hey, these are our rights that the citizens of this nation have that no government can change or take away from them. It sucks to see the government now trying to take those rights away. It's like the whole point was, it doesn't matter, whether free speech causes more problems or whether the Second Amendment might result in more deaths or whatever it may be. Like, even if you take that argument, which I would dispute those arguments, but even if you accept that on face value, it doesn't matter, right? It just doesn't matter. These are your rights. There's a trade-off for, freedom and privacy, and for, liberty, right? Liberty has a trade. There might be a price to pay for that liberty that you have, right? You can either live in a free society or you can live in a, Orwellian society, right? It's like we don't ban cars because 10,000 plus people die in car crashes every year, right? It's like we see the trade-off there, right? It's like, same thing, I think, with our Constitution and with our rights. And those rights should be absolute. And that was the intention of our founding fathers.
Yeah, the rights ought to be as absolute as the 21 million hard cap.
There you go.
It's like, I think it can kind of tie back to the Bitcoin code to a certain degree, because it's, there are some aspects to the code base that Satoshi and, Adam and Hal and kind of the core around forming it early on, there were like these inviolable aspects. 21 million hard cap, probably the principal among those things. There, I think, by extension, I think so much of what you and I are talking about in the context of the U.S. Constitution, there are some inviolable, we hold these truths to be self-evident.
There you go. That
all men are created equal from the Declaration. And then there's like certain rights that we have that cannot be violated. And as society moves on and as the Bitcoin network expands, you have to make some modifications around the margins, and it should necessarily be very, very hard to make those changes.
That's what we're seeing. It's been very, very hard to make any kind of change. Right. A lot of the changes that are made are sort of these additional add-on features that you can opt into if you so choose. Right. But you don't necessarily have to be forced to use these. Like, they've added SegWit and a couple different privacy features that make transactions a little bit more private and stuff like that. And you don't have to, use them, but most people do, because it just makes sense, right? You have the option to do.
That's right. You can always hard fork, and so it's like, I don't know who's going to hard fork the U.S. Constitution, but who knows?
So, Matt, let's go back to the basics, because I want our audience to hear a little bit more. Most people are probably like, they've heard of a family office, but what exactly is that? Why don't you tell us, what, in simple terms for just the average listener, what is a family office? When would you need a family office? And let's just start there at the basics.
Yeah, great. I think this can probably open up a long dialogue. A family office at the end of the day is, not to be glib, it's kind of whatever you want it to be. There's kind of a famous adage out there in my industry that if you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. They all just kind of take their own shape based off of what the clients need. In the most common interpretation, I think, you'll have single family offices, which is usually a group of professionals that come together around a single family, like a Walton family or something like that. A family that is so wealthy that managing that family's wealth is its own full-time job. A family like the Waltons, or, a lot of the like sports team owners or whatever, have so much wealth and so many moving parts, they need a staff to manage those things. They might have their own in-house captive lawyer, their own in-house captive CPA. They're doing deal flow. They've got a house staff, whatever. That's often a family office. And that's kind of like the old fashioned model of a family office, where the family wealth is so big, you have to have some satellite professionals around just that family. My side of the industry is more what's referred to as a multi-family office. And that is a group of professionals that provide comprehensive services for like strategic planning, strategic wealth services for the handful of ultra affluent people and families. Most organizations that call themselves a family office started out as an asset management firm. We did not, but most of the multifamily offices in the United States started out as a successful RIA or investment advisory shop. Got really successful, built a lot of wealth for some families, and effectively kind of closed their doors to new business. And they're just going to provide comprehensive services for those people. But more often than not, those are all investment based. It's like we got these proprietary funds. We're going to manage your money and blah blah blah. It's kind of like a captive hedge fund or something like that. Ours is very different in that our Bespoke Group evolved out of our law firm. As I kind of mentioned at the top, my background as an estate planning attorney. I've been doing sophisticated estate planning law for 24 years and some change now. My business partner who founded this with me, he's been doing a little over 30 years. And in our practice for ultra affluent clients, we got into the Bitcoin space, like I mentioned earlier. And both because of my interest in Bitcoin and the fact that we got more and more Bitcoin giga whales became our clients. And then we had some, like some crypto L1 founders that became some of our clients. Just doing the legal structuring around various trusts and other entities, they wanted more services. They wanted help with managing real estate portfolios and these other things, and they couldn't find people to do that. Can how can we? Will you help us find and then manage relationships with CPAs? Will you help us find and manage relationships with trustees and other fiduciaries? And so in kind of defaulting the view towards yes, we started providing this comprehensive set of services around a handful of people. So we got maybe 10 or 15 clients right now, managing about $1 billion of assets under custody, assets under administration and management right now. Still growing because that's, all of that has really taken place in the last couple of years. But the way we view the family office is we want to walk alongside the ultra affluent family at every phase of their life, with our bias around the truth. I think that how you own your assets and where the assets are owned, that's far more important than what the assets actually are. Whether that's Bitcoin, whether that's venture, whether that's real estate, whatever. If you could have all the market beta, you could even get smart and get some alpha on top of all of that stuff. But if you haven't thought through tax mitigation, if you haven't thought through what happens if I get sued, what happens if I get divorced, what happens if my kids twist off and burn through their inheritance, if you haven't addressed those issues, then all the beta and all the alpha in the world is not going to solve for that kind of wealth erosion. And so we help clients think through and structure various trusts, other entities to help manage their wealth long term, and be, as I was kind of referring to in the Naples event, being opportunistic about what jurisdictions you use to kind of manage those structures. Like a trust in Florida could be great, but a trust in South Dakota can be even better, or a trust in Nevada is even better, or a trust offshore might or might not be more suitable. A limited liability company in Florida could be pretty good,
but Wyoming's even better.
Well, Wyoming is going to be better.
That's what I found.
Yeah, and then Nevis might be even better still if you're trying to thread the needle for the Corporate Transparency Act and or get access to non-U.S. custodians and non-U.S. currencies. If you mentioned the printing away of money, grandma's money sitting in the bank and just losing its purchasing power.
It's really insidious about that if you think about it,
Well, yeah, but a lot of what we do as a family office is help our clients opt out of the U.S. dollar as well. And a lot of them have opted into Bitcoin. A lot of them, most of them who have Bitcoin found Bitcoin well before we did. But a lot of them say, what, I also understand that I have to transact in real world money. What if I can get investments that denominate the dividends in the Swiss franc? The Swiss franc is a hell of a lot more of a hard currency than the U.S. dollar is, or the Norwegian krona, or the Singapore dollar, or something else like that. So we help clients think through not just how they own their assets, where their assets are owned. We are a full stack asset management firm, so we can do asset investment management. But then really what it all comes down to, and where I think there is a real tie-in to the Bitcoin world, is the sense of purpose. What's it all about? Because, at the end of the day, what are we on this earth for? I mean, why do we care about Bitcoin? Why do we care about hard money? I mean, if we're Bitcoiners, we've been in Bitcoin for a while, we've got plenty of fiat denominated wealth. Well, that's kind of hollow, but what is it really all about? And so then a lot of our clients also have kids and or have either a faith perspective or some type of social cause that they care about. And they say, you know what, my kids are going to be fine. I've got them taken care of. But what's the greater purpose beyond this wealth? And so then they start doing work for their church or their synagogue or their community or for causes around privacy, around the environment, or whatever it is that turns them on. We help clients think through
legacy is essentially
exactly. It's all about the legacy. What is this all about? Because once we check out of here, our balance sheet and the people that we leave behind are all we have to account for our lives. And then how can we make that meaningful?
So let's dive into this rabbit hole before I take you to a different one. Do you have, so if I understood this correctly, a single family office is, just basically a whole team that's dedicated to just one family. Whereas a multifamily office, which is more what you're involved in, is like you have this sort of platform and strategy that you use, but not just for one family, for maybe 5, 10, 15 families.
Right.
Is that the idea?
That's right. That's right.
So I got that right.
You got that. Yep.
And to go down this rabbit hole, the question I want to kind of ask, because I'm kind of curious, is how many of your clients like that have set up with you have maybe passed away, and then now you're responsible for dealing with their children or offspring? Do you see that? Like, what is your experience with that?
Yeah, in the family office context, we're fortunate enough that we have not had clients do that yet, because we're still fairly new at the family office in the family office world. Certainly from the law firm world, and I need to be clear, I'm no longer practicing law, so I wound down the law firm back in July. Certainly in the law practice, I'd had plenty of clients die over the years. In the family office, but those become, and this also kind of creates the argument in favor of the multifamily office as a natural evolution in my career, because in the law practice, things are fairly transactional. You'll meet with clients, you'll design and implement some strategies, and they kind of go on their way. And then hopefully you see them from time to time to update things, but then ultimately somebody dies. And then the wind up is also fairly transactional, because in the law firm, you're not managing assets, you're not active in the fiduciary relationships, you're not really involved in the tax relationships going forward. And so you just don't have that depth of relationship with clients in a law firm typically. In the family office, we do. And so, again, fortunately, we haven't had clients die yet that we've had to walk through that journey with, but we're certainly prepared to do that. The other side of the equation, too, is in the Bitcoin and broader crypto space, most of our clients are younger than I am. I'm 52.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's like,
yeah, it makes sense.
Unless barring some accident, most of my clients will outlive me.
Oh, wow.
But we've got a good team that we've been building. We've got probably a staff of close to 20 people.
Oh, nice.
And
so
it's
on your website, very interesting. You got a lot of as a fellow entrepreneur, how do you think about all the people that you employ and that work for you? I know for myself, at least, it's, I'm always concerned that they have their bases covered, that they're paying their bills, that they can support their families. And it's like a heavy weight when you're running a business to make sure everyone's, well taken care of. Do you think about that a lot?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even more than that, which I suspect you feel the same way. I want them to feel passionate about what they do. I mean,
no doubt.
It's one thing to be appropriately economically rewarded for the effort that you put in, but I want my teammates, my team members to be just completely inspired and on fire for what we do. And I'm the founder of this organization, and so I don't really expect them to have the same level of fire that I do necessarily. But I'm really fortunate in that the team that we've built has a deep, deep passion for what we do, for Bitcoin, for the broader crypto space, for making the world a better place through what we do. And I think that absent a sense of purpose, no amount of compensation is going to make it. It's not going to cover for that. Before I started my law practice, I was working in another company where, again, my primary responsibility was around education for other attorneys, and I knew it was time for me to leave. When I was telling my wife, I said, and this was absolutely true. There's literally no amount of money they could pay me to make me stay.
Oh, wow.
It's like, it's not like it was a terribly toxic environment. It's just like, I was bored, and I could do my full-time job in literally about 6 hours a week. And it's like, this is a waste. This is a waste of my energy, a waste of my talent.
Waste of your life.
I've got to go do something else. I've got to do something that I'm really on fire for. And that's when I started the law practice. And so I did that prior job until from 2006 to the end of 2016. Started the law practice in 2017, first quarter, and by the fourth quarter, I was down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And then through the course of 2018, 2019, just doing more and more and more in the Bitcoin world, and trying to find a way to merge my experience in my career with Bitcoin, even going so far as thinking, well, maybe I go in-house as, working for Marathon or somebody else, being like corporate counsel for a law firm. And then I thought, no, that's just dumb. I mean, I'd have to learn something new. It's like, I can do what I do. I mean, I can do what I know and just apply that in the Bitcoin world. And that was an epiphany moment for me to realize that, that my sense of purpose is really around bringing the wealth, legacy, estate planning, structured world into this Bitcoin space, because I think that I can play at least a small role in helping the Bitcoin world become more mainstream. This is one of the things I talk about on a lot of podcasts, is like, we're dealing with an asset that is really complicated. We're dealing with an asset that is extremely valuable. We're dealing with an asset that is a bearer asset, so that there's not a title that says whose Bitcoin is whose.
Those private keys are your title, essentially.
That's it. That's right. But once the coins move from that wallet that your keys control to some wallet that somebody else's keys control, that ain't your Bitcoin anymore.
There you go.
And so it's like, at least technically.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really complicated. And it's so new. I mean, it's 15 years old. So, but there's a tremendous amount of wealth that's been built in this space. For most Bitcoiners, it is, myself included, it is a disproportionate share of their wealth. My clients and myself included, if they were to lose their Bitcoin, it would be economically devastating to them.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's like, some people talk about, well, what's a proper allocation, 2, 5, 10%. Well, it's like, I'm about 80% allocated to Bitcoin personally. And some of my clients are like 95% allocated to Bitcoin. It's like, well, mine's probably an exaggeration. It's probably only about like 75% only. But it's like, that's consequential. And so then, it's consequential, it's complicated. And what I've seen is that very often, especially with married couples, one spouse really gets it. The other spouse may or may not really get it. The kids may not get it. Mom and dad certainly don't get it. And so it's like this, but it's now materially consequential from a wealth perspective. You've got to bring structure around that. And spoiler alert, Bitcoiners are not getting any younger. And Bitcoiners are having kids. Bitcoiners are getting married. Bitcoiners aren't looking to sell their stacks. They want to preserve these stacks as long-term transgenerational wealth. Well, you got a structure around that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we do, and that's how we see the world.
So let's dive back out a little bit. A big topic of conversation at the symposium was this idea of a trust. There's these revocable trusts, irrevocable trusts. Can you, for our listeners, just explain, A, what a trust is, and then B, talk about the difference between revocable and irrevocable? Yeah,
great. So really at its fundamental level, a trust is I'm going to drop some terminology here that we can also define if we need to. But a trust is really a fiduciary or kind of trust-oriented relationship between multiple parties. You have the settlor, that's the individual who creates the trust, the one whose intent we're trying to bring to reality. They're the ones who put their assets in it. The settlor creates the trust.
The investor, I'm the settlor.
You're the settlor.
The settlor.
That's exactly right. You're the settlor, and you create this structure. You are creating that structure for the benefit of beneficiaries. So that's the other that's the second class of people. You have the settlor who creates it for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Those might be your kids, might be your spouse, might be yourself in a trust that's also for your benefit. And it's managed by someone called a trustee. And the trustee is bound by the law and governed by the trust instrument to execute your wishes as the settlor according to what you set forth and consistent with the laws of the jurisdiction in which you've established that trust. So I know that's kind of a mouthful and a bit of a word salad, but I think, if you kind of pick it apart, that is at its essence what a trust is. It is a legal relationship that somebody, the settlor, creates with somebody else, the trustee, with the settlor's assets for the benefit of beneficiaries. That's a trust.
So how much control as the settlor do you have over that? Can I put $100 million in a trust and say, I want you as the trustee to go gamble at the casino for 6 months and come back with the results?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
could I do that? No?
Yeah. I mean, whether that's a great idea or not, it's another issue.
But is it?
But by and large, yeah. I mean, so long as the activities are not patently illegal.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I gotcha.
And so that's what a trust is. You are entrusting
your
some third party with your stuff.
Okay. Sure.
And the benefit of using a trust instead of a will is that wills go through a process called probate. So if you got, if your Aston Martin gets T-boned by a semi and you go off to your great reward somewhere and you don't have a trust, you only have a will, then whoever you leave behind, whether it's a wife, kids, parents, whatever, they have to go down to the county court in whatever county you lived in when you died and then stand in front of a judge and say, hey, this is what Matty had when he died. This is what the will says. Please appoint me as the executor, and I'll do what the law tells me to do. But they've got to do that in a public process. So even my wife, front of a judge,
she also owns those assets, does she have to do that as well? Or?
Not if she's a joint owner. But let's say you and your wife are both gone, or let's say that you've got some assets in your individual name. You've got Bitcoin in a titled wallet, or you've got a business interest, and that business interest is in your name. Well, your wife is not on the chain of title to that asset.
Okay.
In order to get title, she's got to go through the probate process, and that is the process of changing title from the ownership of a dead person to the ownership of a living person.
So like say I'm on an LLC and I have ownership in an LLC, she wouldn't just naturally, unless it was in the articles of organization that she owns that. Could that be in the articles of organization? If I were to die, she automatically, or would that still have to go through probate?
That would probably be in your operating agreement if there's a succession mechanism in there for that.
Put that in there.
Yeah, you could do that in there, but if
it's in there, does it still have to go to probate or no?
It's going to depend on how cooperative the business partners are, and if there's any kind of acrimony, who knows?
Usually it's outlined, and the way I do it in mine is that she has no control.
She get a non-voting interest or something like that. Yeah, smart.
She gets non-voting interest. She gets retaining ownership. She gets
the economic interest, but right.
Or if
we do the same thing.
Agree or whatever. But
ours is the same way.
With that, it wouldn't have to go to probate, or it would.
Well, again, it may or may not. It may or may not. In mine, it would not, because my equity is in a trust.
I got you.
So my equity in Bespoke Group, my equity in most of my stuff is in one of a couple of different trusts, and I've got different trusts for different reasons. And this probably gets into the deeper part of your conversation. But at the fundamental level, what everybody ought to start with is what's called a revocable living trust. It's a trust you create during your lifetime. You are your own trustee. Your wife is a co-trustee on that. So you guys do whatever you want to. It's your stuff. It's a trust you create for the benefit of yourselves. If you have kids, for your kids. And all it does is privatize the decision-making process. So if you have a stroke, if you don't get killed, but you get injured, and now you have, somebody's going to make financial decisions for you. Having a revocable living trust that is properly funded, which means that your assets are titled in the name of that trust, then your wife as the trustee can simply continue to operate on any assets that were titled in the name of the trust, because
without having to go through probate.
Correct, because the trust owns the assets.
Gotcha.
You don't own the assets from a probate perspective. And so you might have been incapacitated, you might have died, but the trust itself didn't. And your wife as the successor trustee, or if something's happened to your wife, then your friend or whoever as your successor trustee, they just step into your shoes and manage things privately without going to the courthouse. But the revocable living trust does not provide any asset protection for you in the event of a lawsuit, and it doesn't get the value of the assets out of your estate from an estate tax perspective, because you have complete control over this trust. So long as you retain this sovereign control, and we're going to get into some Bitcoin terminology here, if you maintain sovereignty over the trust, then you have no asset protection. If you hit a pedestrian or you get sued in a business context or whatever, they're coming after the trust just like they're coming after anything else. And when you die, everything that's in that revocable living trust is on your balance sheet for the IRS, so that if the value exceeds your available estate tax exemption in the year in which you die, then you're going to pay a 40% tax.
Wow.
That's 40 cents on the dollar.
That's wild.
Is going to go to the federal government. And so that's what a revocable trust does. I mean, it's a great strategy for the vast majority of plebs, for the vast majority of just the everyday.
It's kind of that level one strategy.
It's like base level planning for sure. It's like, that's like your base level planning.
At least, so if you have a trust, do you still need a will?
Yeah, there's a special type of will that goes along with a revocable trust, and it really is kind of like a safety net. It's called a pour over will. But then what it does is it says, okay, well, if I died and somebody finds some assets that are not in my trust, only those assets would have to go through probate, and that pour over will would be the document that gets probated. And it says, instead of passing the assets to my wife or my kids, pass the assets to my trust. Okay. And so that's why it's like a safety net. It just pours over the assets into the trust.
Any assets that didn't make it into that revocable trust, would you have to go through probate just for that? Is there like tax associated with that?
No, there's not taxes associated with it. There would be just costs, legal costs, filing fees, that kind of nonsense. And again, you're subject to the timeline and discretion of the court. So it's, and the publicity that goes along with it. And again, having a trust, as I said, is not enough. Going the extra step and making sure that all the assets are titled properly is essential. And then when you're dealing with Bitcoin, you need to make sure, especially if you're dealing with Bitcoin for Bitcoiners, by which I mean where a significant portion of the wealth is tied up in Bitcoin or any other digital asset, you have to address that very specifically, because first of all, most trustees have no idea what Bitcoin is. Most judges certainly have no idea what it is or how to manage it. The laws of most states, with the single exception I'm aware of being Nevada, being in Wyoming, doesn't even contemplate this type of asset class.
Cynthia's amazing.
Yeah, she is amazing. Yeah,
she's
got a great team around her too. I mean, there's this whole great team up in Wyoming. That,
just a down to earth person too.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, she's fabulous. But you really have to think through managing for Bitcoin just like you would manage any other complicated asset that is a concentrated position of wealth. And so you just have to plan for that. Then when the stacks really matter and you're trying to get the value of assets out of your estate, you're dealing with some type of irrevocable trust structure. And the reason it's irrevocable is you have to sever that sovereignty, because if you, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you maintain unilateral sovereignty over a trust or the assets in that trust, that's not outside of your estate from an estate tax perspective, and it's not beyond the reach of your creditors if you get sued. So if you want asset protection and if you want the value to grow outside of your taxable estate, then you have to create some type of irrevocable trust. And there's a litany of different types of irrevocable trusts out there. But really at its core, you have to separate yourself individually from the ultimate economic decision-making inside of that trust structure. And when you're dealing with Bitcoin, it gets really complicated really quickly. And and this is kind of some of the heresy I'll drop here a little bit. You cannot have self-sovereign control over the Bitcoin in the trust if you want to get the value out of your estate. You have to come up with a structure that allows you to sever your sovereign control over the key material in order to get the value out of your estate.
So let me ask you another question. If you move it from, say, my personal control, my personal sovereignty over the Bitcoin, if I move it into an irrevocable trust, is that a taxable event?
It depends on the type of trust. It's not usually an income taxable event. It would probably be what's called a gift taxable event. And that's actually probably a good thing. I've done this for the majority of my own stack with an additional layer of complexity built in, which I think is actually really useful. But really, kind of at its core, you create an irrevocable trust that is for the benefit of certain beneficiaries.
Are you still the settlor in that case?
I'm still the settlor of that.
You still get to decide the mandate of the
You got it. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. But then once I sign it, I personally cannot change it. Now, there are some esoteric ways to allow irrevocable trust to be changed, but I cannot change it anymore. It is irrevocable as to me. I'll usually has a third party like a trust protector or give the trustee certain powers to modify within certain parameters. But I personally can no longer change that trust, and I personally cannot, once the trust is established, I cannot direct distributions from the trust to the beneficiaries. I have to take my hands off.
So you can't still be like a trustee.
That's correct. You cannot be the trustee.
Could your wife be a trustee?
It depends on the type of trust. Okay. It depends on the level of protection that you're looking for.
I see what you're saying.
The highest level of protection would be with an independent third party as your trustee. Now, again, if you got big bags, you're like, 80 million plus probably in a series of trusts, you're probably going to create your own private trust company that your family owns and that you can really control. That can be an independent trustee if it's structured properly. You got to have big bags in order to justify that type of structure. Yeah.
And that is legal.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's sanctioned under the tax code, and it's sanctioned. Florida has a private trust company statute, Tennessee, Nevada, Wyoming, South Dakota. There's like 20 some odd states that allow that. A lot of foreign countries allow that as well. But the administrative load for those it's lift. So, I mean, you got to have, again, I think probably once you're dealing with 50 million plus in irrevocable trusts, then it starts to make some sense to have a private trust company. But for a lot of the clients that we see, we're fortunate in that a lot of our clients are kind of at that threshold. But even for clients that are in the, $10 million, $15 million range when it comes to their Bitcoin holdings, just their aggregate wealth, they need to be considering different types of irrevocable trusts when they're funding those trusts with Bitcoin. It's one thing to separate yourself from the control. You could do that. You could technically do that into a multi-sig of some sort, where you only hold one signature and independent parties, like a couple of buddies, hold the other controlling quorum on your multi-sig. Okay, that's fine to a certain degree, but now you've still concentrated signature control outside of your own signature. And your two buddies who are your multi-sig signature holders, they're not an entity. Now, if they are the trustee of your trust, that might cut it. That might do it. But then you're dealing with the human frailties of having individuals who, even if they've got the best integrity in the world, they're mortal. And so they're going to die at some point, and or the relationships might change and you might want to replace them. And so now you're dealing with key custody all over again. Or you will have the trustee themselves establish a custodial vault somewhere, like at Anchorage or some other qualified custodian. But then again, that trustee has to be able to control the quorum. It's not just a matter of you letting go of the key material. The key material control has to pass into the hands of the trustee in order to now establish ownership by the trust. And that's why I think it's kind of heresy as a Bitcoiner, because it's, we've been taught for years, not your keys, not your coins, all that kind of stuff that just rings off the tongue. And from a sovereignty perspective, that's right. But that breaks down when the priorities shift to tax planning and asset protection planning. The downside is you can't have it both ways. You cannot maintain sovereign control over the coins and have the value outside of your estate from an estate tax perspective. And so that's probably the biggest learning we have to take our client. That's the biggest learning journey we have to take our clients on. And I get it. It's hard. I've had to make that decision myself. But I guess the silver lining there is this is why you should be really selective in who you choose as trustees. They need to have immense insurance, and this is why you only use qualified custodians who are backstopped by regulators, whether it's here in the United States or whether it's overseas.
What are your thoughts on that? That's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, but what are your thoughts on this whole qualified custodian thing, the sort of the prevention, it seems, by the SEC and by the government, essentially it's unequal treatment under the law that we've been dealing with the past 4 years of this administration, violation of the Fifth Amendment, right? Choke point, SEC just, totally recklessly violating the law, doing all these different types of things, losing in court. I think one case they were even committing fraud and they got justice by the judge and, reprimanded. I mean, just stuff you wouldn't see from the SEC.
Like Banana Republic stuff.
Any other, Banana Republic stuff, really. I mean, stuff you wouldn't see in another organization, right? The SEC has a storied history of years and years of winning in court. And now it's like the courts are just like, you guys are out of your fucking minds, right? And they're losing constantly. Even when they win, it's not really a win. It's like, hey, you lost 4 out of the 5, but we'll give you this bone here.
And by the way, a private attorney would be sanctioned and or disbarred or certainly under discipline for having behaved like those SEC lawyers got away with.
There was the Supreme Court, I think, there was a really good case, I think, in the past year that came out where they basically, was it the Chevron doctrine, where normally they would defer to these agencies and say, we'll give you a reasonable amount of room to operate, but no, you can't do that. You can't just let them decide because they just abuse the law. They just totally make up laws. Right, legislative branch. I mean, it's like crazy. It's ridiculous what's happening. So what are your thoughts there when it comes to this whole qualified custodian thing? Because obviously this is a hot topic issue, and what I've seen is like even these ETFs. I mean, they seem to all be using Coinbase as the custodian. It seems like a huge
you create a massive honeypot for a massive risk for sure. Look, I mean, we're an SEC regulated entity. Bespoke Group is an RIA. We're SEC registered, so we're subject to the custody rule, which means to the extent we're helping customers, we can only use qualified custodians. And that was another. I don't want to interrupt you again, but that was another whole thing that was like a bipartisan thing where they repealed SAB 121. How does that affect you? What are your thoughts there? Yeah, I mean, I've probably not quite competent to speak in detail about SAB 121, but I think it's just an unfortunate reality. I think. The Bitcoin purist, the libertarian purist, the privacy purist in me wishes it weren't so. But the practical reality is that's what the law says, and so we have to follow the law. How we address that for a lot of our highly affluent clients is get custody outside the United States. It's kind of funny. Yeah, it is. It's funny and it's sad. It's pathetic. It is sad. That's really what's going on. I mean, I know the whole industry is like, everyone's moving. There's a lot of activity happening outside the United States because of this obstinate and unethical, in my mind, and it's certainly uneven. It's certainly unevenly administered. I mean, again, it's almost like different sets of rules apply to different sets of. And again, fundamentally, our Constitution says that this cannot be so. Right? It's the Fifth Amendment is equal treatment under the law. Right. But they're in flagrant violation of that. And I'll go so far as to say they were already told this in the previous administration with the same clowns, the same people in power. We're told, hey, you can't discriminate against gun companies. You can't discriminate against weed company or whoever. Yeah. Or you can't discriminate against porn companies or payday lenders or whatever. Though you may not like them, they're legal under the law. But we can against crypto companies. Yeah, but that's what they're doing. It's the whole choke point thing, right? They're pushing it back and they're doing it against, whoever they don't like, right? Elizabeth Warren and her lackey. Her cabal, it's like, it's ridiculous. Yeah. It's totally unconstitutional behavior. Yeah, it is. There's just accountability. That's what infuriates me, right? What infuriates me is cutting a 6-7 huge check to the government, pay my dues, and then the same government comes back and attacks me and tries to fuck me. Yeah. I mean, it just makes me so angry, right? It's so infuriating. Yeah, I get it. Cut off my banking relationships, do all this stuff, stop. Well, again, that's why we do a lot of work offshore. That's why we do a lot of work offshore. Yeah. It's like, which again, it's a pathetic reality, I think, for the leading economy in the world, the bastion of freedom and democracy theoretically in the world, and we can't even bank our own clients without a lot of heartburn in the United States. But the other side of it too is there's a lot of tomfoolery that goes around in other jurisdictions, and so a lot of what we try to do. I mentioned this. I had this comment at the Naples symposium as well. That's why we see diversification as far more than just moving across a basket of investment assets. I don't really care if you diversify your Bitcoin holdings. I'd just assume you not, unless you really want to for some compelling reason. But you should have diversified ownership, which means multiple structures, different rules to govern different baskets of assets, and you should have diversified jurisdictions, not just domestically but also internationally.
I like that a lot.
And again, I'm not a whale, but I've got size appropriate planning for myself, which includes a revocable living trust, which is the base level planning for my family and me. I have an irrevocable trust that we established first in Wyoming, but then we moved that recently to the Cook Islands.
I heard you mention that the other day, and that was actually my next question was, how do you leverage this regulation where you arbitrage across?
Yeah, we'll get into that in some detail. But then my Cook Islands trust owns series interests in a Wyoming series limited liability company, and my Wyoming series LLC has accounts here in the U.S. and internationally for Bitcoin. So I can have international qualified custody for my Bitcoin holdings in the LLC structure that I personally am the investment manager of the LLC. I personally am the investment trust advisor, making all the investment decisions both at LLC level and at trust level. But I've got friends who are serving as the general manager, and they're the ones who execute my wishes as inside the LLC. So I say, buy the Bitcoin, or I say, sell this asset. I can't personally do that because I'm just the investment decision maker. They're the ones that pull the cord. But then the LLC itself is owned by this irrevocable trust. I, as the investment manager of the irrevocable trust, can tell the trustee, sell the LLC. If the LLC distributes money up to the trust, I tell the trustee what to invest in, but the trustee has to do what I say. Because if they don't, I, as the settlor, remember, of this whole structure, I can fire that trustee and find another trustee. And so the settlor, even though you do have to sever your sovereign control over the underlying assets, you can maintain a tremendous amount of control over the overall structure and who sits in what chair at what time.
Interesting.
So you have to sever enough control to get it out of your reach from a tax perspective and from an asset protection perspective, but you get to select, remove, and replace the people who carry out your wishes.
Very interesting. So it's like fully complying with the law, but you're navigating a lot of the challenges and issues. So very interesting.
And it kind of back up to the top of what is a family office. To a certain degree, these become like many family offices, where you have the assets held inside a limited liability company of some sort. And I mentioned a series LLC, which is a super interesting type of strategy where basically one company has different cells of activity inside of it and different kind of clusters of assets that are each segregated from each other. But then that LLC is owned by the trust. I, as the creator of this whole structure for my personal wealth, I get to select who is making what decisions, and they have to follow my instructions and comply with the law and the governing documents. That kind of becomes, to a certain degree, its own little like mini family office, even for like a quasi pleb type of structure.
Very interesting.
And in my multifamily office, Bespoke Group then helps design these things, manage them, facilitate the custody, coordinate with the tax accounting, and all that kind of stuff.
So it's what I'm gathering from this is it seems like we talked a little bit about trusts and irrevocable and revocable. Where you set up each one of those entities in different states or different island nations, wherever, that matters, right?
Yeah.
Like,
become opportunistic about what jurisdictions you use.
There you go. So certain, revocable trusts might be good in Wyoming, while certain irrevocable trusts might be good in the Cook Islands or in Nevada, right? Am I getting this right?
Yeah. And I think that the point of clarification I would make, or the friendly amendment I would make to that is your revocable living trust is usually going to be in your home jurisdiction. So you're a Floridian. So you're probably going to have a Florida revocable living trust. And there's a whole kind of battery of other documents that go along with that, like powers of attorney, your pour over will. And the reason you're going to use Florida or the reason you're going to use your home jurisdiction for your revocable trust is because if something's got to be taken to the courthouse, you want to go to the local courthouse so your wife or people aren't having to fly somewhere else and establish.
Like myself, who has property in Wyoming and in Florida, doesn't matter. I can pick.
You could do it either way. Yeah, you could do it either way.
Yeah. Two great states, by the way.
Two great states, by the way. Yeah, for sure. But then a guy like me, I'm a Coloradan, and Colorado trust law is not that great. I mean, it's fine, but it's, but who wants fine? You can have awesome.
Yeah.
So my revocable trust is Colorado because that's where I live. But my limited liability company was in Wyoming, is in Wyoming. And fun fact, I'm sure you know this, but a lot of your listeners probably don't. Wyoming literally invented the LLC.
Yeah.
1977, they were the first jurisdiction that invented the LLC.
I had to argue with my lawyers recently about all this. I mean, I watched what happened in, I think is it Delaware, where they went after Elon and basically just totally
on his comp
package, hundreds of years of case law, and just basically some corrupt judge was like, I know all the investors signed this agreement and it's in the agreement and they all agreed to it. Yeah. You followed it to a T and they all, ratified it, but we're just going to overturn all this.
Some share
with 8 shares.
Some shareholder like $2,500. Yeah.
I mean, I just like the most ridiculous partisan. I mean, she has no clue what she just did for LLC. I will never, ever, ever set up an LLC there ever again.
Well, I know.
So I know, 100 other people who are like, feel the same way.
Well,
so I had to argue with my lawyer who was like, hey, we're going to set up here. I'm like, I don't want to fucking set up there. I refuse.
That's right. Well, Wyoming has consistently been innovative around LLC laws, around trust laws. They've been very kind of forward thinking around Bitcoin mining and crypto, the asset management, the tax side of it. Wyoming, from a purely Bitcoin and crypto specific perspective, Wyoming is hands down the best jurisdiction in the country for business formation. And I would say that they are among the best as like trust jurisdictions are concerned, among the best. But again, it kind of depends on what you're going for. If you were like one of these giga wealthy families and you need a private trust company, you're probably going to set that up in either Wyoming or Nevada. Maybe South Dakota if you're like in the billions, but South Dakota, from a private trust company perspective, South Dakota does not have an unregulated model, which means that your family trust company would have to be subject to audit and review by the banking commissioner in South Dakota. And they're cool. That's great. But why do you want to have that level of scrutiny over personal family matters? So Wyoming and Nevada are among a few states that have a purely private, unregulated family trust company model. So those are our preferred jurisdictions. But then when we think about the trust law itself, then conventional wisdom, which I think is, it's pretty safe to assume that Nevada and South Dakota are the most private, protected trust jurisdictions in the United States. Wyoming is excellent, but it's not as good as Nevada and South Dakota from an asset protection perspective. Wyoming, for what it's worth, famously allows quiet trusts, which means that you don't have to tell the beneficiaries what's in the trust or even if the trust exists.
Interesting.
So if you've got a problematic beneficiary, somebody who just burns through money or whatever, you can have these quiet trusts. Nevada does too. South Dakota does too, but Wyoming's is the best there. But then trusts in Nevada and South Dakota are more insulated from the claims of potential creditors if a claim were to arise. Trusts can literally last forever in South Dakota. They literally do not have to end. Nevada, they can last up to 365 years, which is damn near forever. I'll be retired by then. And Wyoming is like 1,000 years. So it's like
1,000 years sounds good to me.
Yeah. So it's, but then you start looking offshore as well. From a true, like Bitcoin standard, Bitcoin grade asset protection and privacy, you're probably gonna look at someplace like the Cook Islands. First of all, because very few people know where it is. It's this little archipelago off of the coast of New Zealand. They were originally part of the British Protectorate. They're now an independent country.
Ah, interesting.
But they so they've got English common law, but they've got some really interesting benefits that no other jurisdiction really has. First and foremost, they do not recognize foreign judgments registered anywhere. So you could take a case all the way up to the United States Supreme Court potentially, and the judge in the Cook Islands does not care. So, well, guess what? I don't care if you're the SEC. I don't care if you're the IRS. I don't care if you're whatever creditor out there. Congratulations on winning your case in the United States. Now you get to do it again down here in the Cook Islands. By the way, you got 2 years to do it because there's a 2-year statute of limitations. The claim has to arise within 2 years of forming the trust, and the case has to be brought within that time frame. Otherwise, the claims are forever barred. You also have to hire local counsel in the Cook Islands. There's a tiny number of attorneys that are licensed to practice law in the Cook Islands, but you got to find one of them, and you've got to hire them to bring your case. You also cannot take a contingent fee base case to the Cook Islands. A creditor can't say, hey, the attorney gets paid off of the settlement.
Yeah.
You pay as you go.
Yeah.
And finally, it's a loser pays regime. So if the creditor brings a claim and they're unsuccessful, not only have they paid as they go on their own, they pay the cost of defense. So for people who are really looking for the highest level of standard in asset protection, they're going to be probably going to the Cook Islands. And then again, you layer these strategies. So like inside a lot of these Cook Islands trusts, the assets are actually often either in a Wyoming trust or a Nevis trust or some other type of structure. So then if the creditor does prevail against the trust itself, well, now they've got to go sue on the LLC to pierce that. So they got to be able to pierce the corporate veil. Right. So it just creates these layers of friction for the creditor to have to pierce. Now, again, those layers of friction also apply to the settlor, the one who created this. So it does become a bit cumbersome, but that's part of the trade-off for the privacy and the asset protection.
Gotcha. Have you flown over there to Cook Islands?
Have not.
Do you plan to?
Yeah, eventually. Yeah. It's like I got to pack a lunch. I mean, that's a long trip.
Yeah,
that's a long trip.
So, who do you communicate with over there? How does your relationship work?
We've got trustees over there that we work with. They're based in both the Cook Islands. They also have an office in New Zealand. We've worked with them for a long time. They are the trustee of my own trust. My business partner's got a trust out there. A lot of our clients have a trust out there. And then we do a lot of work, like I said, with Wyoming limited liability companies. We also, my company, Bespoke Group, also has a Nevis arm. So our Nevis company can do either non-U.S. asset management, or we can do non-U.S. management of like LLCs, things like that.
Do you guys ever look at like dual citizenship and those types of things? You talk about that. What does that look like in the Cook and St. Kitts and Nevis?
Yeah, that's something we don't do natively in-house, but we have partners that we partner with to facilitate that. We've got a great relationship with a company based out of the UK that their specialty is in secondary citizenships and secondary residences. So I probably can't speak in great detail, with great accuracy about various options, but St. Kitts is definitely one up there. Portugal has recently changed theirs, but there's still some options in Portugal. There's options in Austria. A lot of what we are talking with our clients about, again, the clients that we're working with are, to a certain degree, cost is of little consequence to them. We are looking at what is the net benefit of the specific jurisdiction that you're getting secondary residence in. If it's just a matter of getting a secondary passport, so you're not traveling under the blue U.S. passport, that's one thing. Or you just want to have some other place to legally be able to reside if shit goes sideways, and you just want like a plan B. It's another thing altogether to say, well, I don't want my plan B to just be like some atoll out in the middle of the South Pacific that, I can't get internet and there's no food. And it's like, it's this, like a prison island, like nowhere land or something like that. But a lot of our clients say, I'd like to have access to travel freely all throughout Europe. Well, that means we got to get something that's got EU rights. And so it's either Spain or it's Portugal or, some other country that's got rights to travel throughout the whole Shenzhen region with Europe and Scandinavia. We have a lot of clients that we're helping do that with. Some of them want to buy real estate overseas as well. And that's part of the diversification conversation, having access to, to have the legal right to be somewhere else in the event of a pandemic lockdown, hypothetically, or something like that. It's like, maybe you just want to have another place you can be for a while.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about inheritance, right? With, obviously with stocks and property and different things, but what is your thought process on crypto itself, like Bitcoin, inside one of these trusts maybe? What is the difference there between Bitcoin, crypto, and other assets when it comes to inheritance?
I think.
What are the unique challenges?
Yeah, it's complicated, of course, because the nature of the asset is so complex. Everybody, if you inherit a Schwab account, you kind of get it. You understand. You got your basket of equities in there. You know what to do with that. You get a basket of crypto. and maybe you've got a bunch of ETH that's staked, and you got a bunch of Sol that's staked, and you got a bunch of Bitcoin that's locked up, and maybe not locked up, but just like sitting in cold storage, or you're running some options on it or something like that. The beneficiaries who inherit this stuff, it's like they have no idea what to do with this stuff. More often than not, certainly their financial advisors or the people who are like the wealth managers that are helping this, they have no idea. Like, it's going to take you 6 epochs to unstake from ETH. The reason I know is I just did this. I just sold off the last of my ETH, and went back to Bitcoin on that. So it's like so about the only crypto I have is just dust. The rest of it just the stuff that's left behind that's too small to transfer out. The rest of it's just in Bitcoin. But my kids fortunately understand Bitcoin, but most beneficiaries won't. Certainly not to the level that the settlor who built this wealth with Bitcoin understood it. So then, a lot of what I talk to other folks about is you have to be thinking about inheritance beyond just the mechanical transfer of the asset. It's one thing, like I said, to just transfer the Schwab account to the beneficiary or transfer the house to the beneficiary. If you give the kid the private keys to this Bitcoin, do they know what to do with it? Probably not. And do they know how to access the staking nodes and unstake the ETH? Do they even have a sense of the market timing, the market cycles to know this is, we're about, once we're about 6 months post halving, bull may be kicking off and we may be in for a 12 to 18 month run. Not financial advice. But if Bitcoin is going on a big run, do the beneficiaries understand? Don't liquidate that stuff. And or if the top comes in and now we're entering a trough, and maybe we're going to be in this trough for 18 to 24 months, does the trustee of the trust have the authority to hold through a trough? Do they have the ability? Do they have the authority to trade OTC? Do they have the ability or authority to trade options on that Bitcoin? What does the settlor want? You got to have all these instructions inside the trust instruments that will govern those assets, because if we're dealing with real estate or farmland or small businesses or whatever, the law is very clear on how that stuff is managed, and trustees understand how that works, and beneficiaries understand how to inherit those things. Now we're dealing with this novel asset class. None of those people have any idea what they're doing, and so they have to be, you have to be really mindful about the instructions that you leave behind and the advisors that get brought to the table in order to help make sure that the economic value that gets built in these structures goes to its ultimate intended beneficiary.
Interesting. So, obviously you've thought through this very well, but say something does happen to one of your, a settlor of your trust, and they pass away and they've left all this Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, just throw those 3 coins out there for as an example. Does your team feel comfortable if you guys are essentially the trustees? Can you manage that? Like, what is your thought process there? All the things you just mentioned, essentially. Yeah. Would you guys take a look at that?
We from a conflict of interest perspective, we don't serve as trustees. We can serve as advisors to the trustee on behalf of our clients.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so, we certainly can.
But do you vet the trustees to make sure that they're capable of doing this stuff? They're capable of managing it.
We work with trustees that we've got strong relationships with that know how we think. They know that we're in Bitcoin. They know that we're in crypto. And they say, okay, well, you guys know what you're doing. We're subject to the custody rule, like I mentioned, of the SEC. So all of our custodians are qualified custodians. So, again, that might mean Anchorage Digital US. It might mean Anchorage Singapore. It might mean like Bank Frick out in Liechtenstein or a handful of others. But it's like those are custodians that they exclusively are set up for managing digital assets. My team is built around managing digital assets. And so whether it's, and I'm probably only nominally competent to talk about Bitcoin. The other stuff is, whatever. But I've got a lot of guys on my team are like the deep crypto nerds. So it's like whatever the, shitcoin is that clients are dealing with, which is like, opportunistic or whatever, that's fine. Yeah. I've got a team that, they've got really deep chops when it comes to that stuff. So,
nice.
Airdrops coming in or, NFTs getting managed or whatever.
Yeah. So that's
the question then becomes, what's it going to be worth on a secondary market? We've not yet had to liquidate NFTs, but that day is coming.
I actually had one of my questions was about NFTs, so as NFTs and unique digital assets gain prominence, how do you incorporate these new asset classes in the client estate?
Same way. It's like it's a digital representation of art, or whatever you want to call it. And it's a token. It just goes into some vault, just like anything else. And those vaults can have a title on it. Fungible tokens like Bitcoin. It's not from a custodial perspective and from a planning perspective, it's really no different. Mm-hmm. What you really get into is the marketability of the asset. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, if it's a fungible token like ETH, like Sol, like Bitcoin, whatever, that's easy. A ready market for that. Now, if we're dealing with some kind of special ordinal or some other type of NFT like that, then you got to be able to find the secondary market to extract maximum value off of that. And, time will tell as those things build out to see if there's a really robust secondary market for that.
While we're on this topic, what do you think about like DeFi and decentralized finance and like smart contracts in general, right? Because some of this stuff can kind of be automated. Like if I wanted to lock up, if I wanted to wrap some Bitcoin, move it to Ethereum, lock it up for, 100 years or 20 years or whatever, and say, hey, this wrapped Bitcoin or this, Coinbase, CBBTC, whatever it is, and I'm just throwing some stuff out there. Yeah. And I wanted to put in a smart contract and say, hey, it's locked in this wallet for, 10 years, it can't be moved. And I execute that, that's what do you think about, how do you see all that kind of stuff? All this?
That is the wild frontier of the, not just of the crypto space, but certainly beyond the reach of anybody in the estate planning space. Yeah. I think, again, so I've got a couple of thoughts on this. I mean, one gets back to what I was talking about earlier about this mechanical asset, the mechanical transfer of assets versus the transfer of assets with some sense of meaning behind it. It's one thing to wrap your Bitcoin, put it in a smart contract, or put it in a vault with a dead man switch or whatever, and say, hey, when I kick the bucket or whenever this happens, then subject to the terms of the smart contract is going to move from this vault to a new wallet address or whatever it is. Okay, that's fine from a mechanical transfer of asset. However, have you thought through the tax consequences of that? Who's on the other side of who's on the receiving end of that? That will be a taxable transfer at that time. It's probably a taxable transfer when you put it in the smart contract to the extent you can't revoke that smart contract. And then, but let's assume all that stuff's worked out. It hasn't been, but let's assume that's worked out. Now you got this wrapped Bitcoin that you put in for a decade or for 100 years or whatever, and Bitcoin's gone from 62,000 or whatever to 500,000 or whatever the number is. The person on the receiving end of that, what's going on in their lives at the time they receive that? Are they ready for that kind of wealth? I mean, are they mature enough for that kind of wealth? Are they in the middle of a divorce? Are they in the middle of some other lawsuit? Are they in the middle of a meth habit? I mean, what's going on here? So it's like, I think to a certain degree, the technology is amazing that will allow us to do that. The law is so far behind on thinking these things through. The best I think we can hope for is to work with the individuals who hold those assets and then ask these second and third order thinking questions. So much of what we talk about in the Bitcoin world is about second and third order effect. But I think a lot of that is just kind of lip service when we're just thinking through the mechanical transfer like dead man switches. I've got a client who is a super great guy, hardcore Miesian, and hardcore Bitcoiner, very active in mining and coding. And I had a series of conversations, but before he became a client, I had probably about 6 months of conversations with him, helping him really understand the gravity of making sure that the people on the receiving end are ready for that wealth, because he was quite upfront saying they're not. They don't have the technical expertise. They don't have the financial maturity to manage the asset. So, okay, well then all you're doing is giving them a massive burden, and if Bitcoin is going to survive beyond 15 years, beyond 50 years, we have to be thinking through the intentional wealth structuring and wealth strategies that will help it really become the bedrock of a new mainstream economy, which I think it can be. But we as Bitcoiners have to take it seriously and give this asset the level of attention any really meaningful asset deserves.
I like that answer. How do you guys approach? We talked a little bit about regulatory arbitrage, but how do you? I mean, looking at what's happening geopolitically right now, seems like we're going from a multipolar world to a unipolar world to a multipolar world. All these conflicts, Middle East, Ukraine, Russia, China, all this stuff's happening, Taiwan. So much is happening. How do you plan for that? How do you advise clients to structure their wealth to ensure, long-term security, preservation in light of all the geopolitical changes? Do you guys do like wargaming? How do you think through that aspect of things?
We actually have a team dedicated to geopolitics and macro.
That's amazing.
It's like they're new additions to our team, but that is their expertise, is geopolitics and macro, global macro. So yeah, we're looking at that all the time. We're looking at, and some of that's just market opportunities, in foreign markets, but a lot of that is like conflict response. What will be not only the challenges and risks, but what are the opportunities in some of these more volatile areas, and then how do you size exposure to those opportunities? We've got some concerns about China for sure, but there are also some amazing opportunities in China if you size your exposure appropriately. And I think one of the things we talked about yesterday at the Naples Symposium was this idea of leaving. We didn't really kind of frame it this way, but kind of like leaving back doors open in these strategies. I talked about irrevocable trusts. I've talked about these types of really complicated structures. And when people hear the word irrevocable, they feel like, without learning more, they feel like I'm being kind of locked in a box, or I'm being painted into a corner. And if things change, I'm kind of stuck. It's actually not the case. There are lots of different ways to modify these structures once they've been set in stone, so to speak. You can relocate them from one jurisdiction to the next. Opportunistically, I moved my trust from Wyoming to the Cook Islands just because I wanted the better protection and I wanted a greater level of privacy. Wyoming is fine, but Cook Islands is better. And I thought, well, I'm doing Cook Islands for other clients. Why don't I do it for myself? So, you can move these things. If I decide that Cook Islands is no longer the place to be and I want to move it to Isle of Man or Jersey or some other place, I can do that too.
Nice.
I can always relocate. Resitus is the technical word for it. Relocate my LLC. If Wyoming twists off and some nut gets involved there and they completely blow up their LLC laws, then it's like, well, we'll just, we'll change that to some other jurisdiction, or we can move it to Nevis if we want to.
Yeah.
So, realizing that, it's really kind of a matter of having a team around us that is spotting issues. Part of that's the legal team, guys like me, the wealth strategists, thinking through the trust laws, how they evolve, company laws, how they evolve, and how different laws in different jurisdictions evolve. And part of it's the macro geo team that is looking at, okay, where are the risks, where are the opportunities, and then how do we synchronize these things? That's why we can't do this just as a small team. That's why we've got to have a team of people around us.
There's so many different factors to consider and think about.
Yeah.
With Bitcoin and Web3 and crypto, technology is growing, adoption's growing, more wealth is being created. Again, we talked about Bitcoin being the best performing asset in all of human history. How do you envision the role of family offices evolving? What do other family offices, what new skills do they need to stay relevant in this changing landscape?
Yeah, they really need to take this asset class seriously for sure. I mean, we're at the beginning edge of the largest wealth transfer in human history. As baby boomers die and pass their wealth to millennials and Gen X, and to a certain degree Gen Z, but there are trillions upon trillions of dollars changing hands. The inheritors are not really interested in the wealth management strategies that grandma and grandpa had.
Yeah.
They are all about Web3.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, It's just a different era, a different group of people that are comfortable with the internet and the technologies of the internet and what it enables.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's their native. It's their native tongue, and Bitcoin is money for the internet. And so single family offices, I think, will kind of naturally evolve if they're governed right, because the way a single family office is designed to work is create a framework for inheriting generations to start sharing in the decision-making process over time through a process that we kind of refer to as family governance. So as kids get older and they express certain interests, whether it's in philanthropy or in money or whatever, they start to have a seat at the table in sharing in these decisions. I think single family offices will naturally move in that direction as they're kind of pulled in that direction by the inheriting class. Multifamily offices, like our competition, to the extent we have competition in the space, they're going to be forced there because as money changes hands from their clients who built the wealth to the inheritors, if those multifamily offices are not prepared to manage and deal with and take seriously Bitcoin and other virtual digital currencies and crypto assets, they're going to lose business. They're going to lose a tremendous amount of business. They're going to come to firms like mine that are effectively crypto native. I mean, we built around Bitcoin. We would not be a family office but for our foray into Bitcoin. It wasn't even on our radar screen.
Interesting.
So, the way we are dealing with this is, first of all, our clients are already crypto native. They built their wealth in crypto. The majority of our clients didn't build their wealth in something else, and now they want to put a toe in the water in crypto.
Yeah.
No, they built it in Bitcoin or they built it in crypto, DeFi, tokenized projects, whatever. So that's like their native tongue. And like I said, they're in their 30s and 40s and to a certain degree 50s. So hopefully, barring something surprising, they've got some longevity ahead of them. And to the extent they do have kids, their kids are too young to be sharing the decision-making process. I do have one client for whom we did a single-family office, and then my multifamily office is also continually kind of supporting on the periphery. Mm-hmm. They now have kids that are in their late teens, and those kids are crypto native as well. Mm. And so those kids are helping make decisions around NFTs, around gaming projects and other things like that. And so, and the parents crypto native as well, but the kids are now sharing in the decision-making process. We also have kids that are sharing in the philanthropy decision-making process for some of our other clients.
That was my next question. How do you see Web3 native philanthropy differing from maybe some of your other clients? Do you notice a difference there?
Yeah, I deal with it mostly in the Bitcoin space. I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've got a non-Bitcoin crypto client that has yet done significant philanthropic planning. I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
But our two biggest philanthropy projects that we're helping to manage are both with mega Bitcoin holders, and one of them has a real heart to help people be kind of drawn out of human trafficking, whether it's sex trafficking or work trafficking or whatever. And so that client has put about $40 million worth of Bitcoin into building a brick and mortar that's fully staffed to help people in California that have been trafficked. And they provide education, they provide services, and they're literally pulling people off of the streets, helping them become equipped for jobs, and then sending them out in the workforce. And that would not happen but for Bitcoin.
Wow.
And that client is somewhat involved directly in that because that's that client's passion. We have other clients that are also mega Bitcoin holders who have a very deep faith perspective. And they last year, for tax reasons and just for charitable reasons, they wanted to put $15 million of Bitcoin into a donor-advised fund to then manage distributions over time. And so we helped them set that up. And one of the things that we do that is, I think, pretty unique among wealth managers is we can help clients set up a donor-advised fund and sit long Bitcoin. Every other donor-advised fund that I'm aware of that allows you to contribute Bitcoin converts upon receipt. We don't have to. We can have a mandate that sits long Bitcoin. And so that $15 million worth of Bitcoin went in December, and then of course we got all the beta to this point. But because of the client's faith perspectives, they said, we don't want anybody to know who's behind this wealth. So will you be our emissary to the churches that will receive these assets? Well, that's what family offices do, because as we talked about yesterday, not my job is not part of the lexicon. So the answer is yes. Yeah, we'll figure this out. And so I had to start calling around to these churches and talk to the church leaders and convince them, look, this is legit. This is real. There's $7 million coming to each of these organizations. But you can never know, and you can never ask. You will never know the name of the people behind this. And that's imperative. And so as far as the churches are concerned, We represent anonymous benefactors to their organization. And for this family, they're just getting started. We're helping them plan their 2024 contribution as well, which will also just be another contribution of Bitcoin in kind to then go out into other philanthropic activities. And it's because these people, these clients, like a lot of people in Bitcoin, they didn't get into Bitcoin to get rich. That was a side effect.
Yeah.
They got into Bitcoin because Bitcoin is what it is. Bitcoin is hard money. Bitcoin is accountability. Bitcoin is responsibility. And those are the values that drew them into it. And then the meteoric rise of Bitcoin as a dollar-denominated asset class was just the byproduct of Bitcoin being what it is.
Yeah, once you understand the fundamentals, I mean, it's just obvious.
Yeah, it
becomes
is.
Obvious.
I mean, but we don't need this
hard work.
Yeah, and they said we don't need this wealth.
Yeah,
I mean, they're wealthy anyway. I mean, they're high wage earners, and it's like, what are we going to do with all of this wealth? We don't want to just give it to our kids and spoil them rotten. It's like our kids are fine, but now how can we make the world a better place through the wealth that we've accumulated? For them, it's an expression of their faith. For this other one, it's being really active in a community that's been really exploited and helping people in a very practical way. And I believe that as the Bitcoin world and the broader crypto world matures, and we have more people who are, millennial and younger, a lot of what I think some of the benefits of millennials and the younger cohorts is they have a broader worldview than Gen Xers like I do, and certainly than baby boomers above me. It's like the Gen Xers, I mean, first of all, we're such a small demographic anyway, but Gen Xers kind of grew up in the shadow of these baby boomers, which is like all about the me generation, get me more. And that's a lot of what we've kind of seen go wrong in corporate culture. My generation and the generations below me, certainly the millennials, have taken this and championed it. Is like, no, there's a deeper purpose here. I want to make a mark on this. And for a lot of our clients, they've done that with Bitcoin. And now how can they express that value beyond themselves?
Let's change gears a little bit. You had a article, I think, in Bloomberg Tax article.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, and it was kind of about crypto and volatility. With crypto's notorious volatility, how do you approach risk management for crypto affluent clients? What strategies do you implement to balance high risk, high reward investments with the need for long-term wealth stability?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a great question. At least in the Bitcoin space, I mean, again, this may be a little bit nuanced, but Bitcoin is not crypto. Crypto is not Bitcoin. And our clients perceive that. Bitcoin is not the asset that they are being opportunistic with. Mm-hmm. They are, with very few exceptions, our clients are long Bitcoin and long only. Now, we've seen the fallout of things like Celsius, BlockFi, other organizations that were promising some type of yield or return on Bitcoin. Why? Because your Bitcoin's not actually there. Yeah, they're actually playing games with it. It's being rehypothecated. They're playing games with it.
It was crazy to me how many people didn't understand that there was some risk involved with this. It's like, if you're getting a yield on something, right, there is inherent risk. It's, you know what I mean? Like, you're giving somebody your Bitcoin and they're, doing stuff with it to get you yield, right? It's sharing that yield with you, and that's your. This is the rate of return. Like with Celsius, it was like 16%.
It's bananas.
Family members are coming to me like, oh, just do it here. I'm like, you're getting 16%. This seems extremely risky. Yeah. Whatever they're doing with this to give you this kind of yield is inherently risky.
That's right.
That's your compensation for risking your asset. Yeah. I talked to some of my sister and maybe some other people out. I said, don't do this. It's not wise.
For sure. Yeah, and I mean, it might seem somewhat ironic to say this, but because we are a multifamily office built around lawyers in the Bitcoin space, but we are notoriously conservative. Yeah, it's like. And that, for a lot of people, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, if you're conservative, why are you in the Bitcoin space? Like, no, but if you understand Bitcoin, it does make sense. Yeah. But our philosophy is, if you're not paying for custody, it ain't custody. So it's like, if you're, if it's free, then either the company is doing this out of the goodness of their hearts,
which is highly unlikely,
or your Bitcoin is not there, or your crypto is not there. So they're getting paid somehow. It's either you're either paying in the front or you're getting paid in the back. It's like, it's not, they're not doing it for free. So when we talk about Bitcoin specifically, at least for the clients that we get to serve, for most of them, it is a long hold asset. Although a lot of our clients are so top heavy in it, they do want to work their way out of it in tax optimized ways, because like, great problem to have, but you're worth, a couple $100 million and 90% of that's Bitcoin. That's a lot of exposure. And even if you're long the assets, like you got a couple $100 million, how much more do you really, really want? Because there are tons of problems, challenges that go along with having wealth of that magnitude. I mean, it just seems kind of silly to say, but
I mean, you also want to own other assets, right? Bitcoin solves this like problem with money, but there's more to life than just money, right? You want to own property, you want to own businesses, you want to own equities, and stocks you believe in, right? So there's it just makes sense.
Well, and ultimately, it's going to change hands anyway. It's like ultimately, so then ultimately, you have to think through. Okay, well, I'm going to leave this to my wife. I'm going to leave this to my kids. I'm going to leave this to my grandkids. Okay, are they ready? Will they be the best versions of themselves by inheriting hundreds of millions of dollars? Or are there ways that you want to, do you want to set them up for a level of success, but also create enough adversity in their lives so they become better human beings through this process? Because
it's something I struggle with too with my kids, is trying to strike that right balance.
I mean, a sense of privilege. I mean, they grow up going to private schools, flying charter, doing whatever they want to do. It's like, how do you create the drive and the spark inside of them for entrepreneurship to do the kind of things that you're doing right now?
I'm using sports right now. That's the best thing I got right now. But I'm open to suggestions. So if you got anything else, throw them at me, man.
Yeah, well, it's got to be tailored to the family. It's got to be true to who you are. But kind of back to, I think the essence of the question is, you've got this bedrock value asset like Bitcoin. Most of our clients have a very low basis in that from a capital gains tax perspective, because they were mining it on a laptop, or they were running a company denominated in Bitcoin back in 2011, 2012, massive stacks with virtually no basis from a capital gains tax perspective. So every time they sell it, they're going to be paying the top capital gains tax rate on that. So we look at things like borrowing against that Bitcoin, making sure that the escrow is secure and they're not going to get called out on some type of loan that they're not ready to cover, then borrowing against that, taking the borrowing and then reinvesting into income producing assets. Something often just as banal as triple exempt municipal bonds. So you can take an asset that would otherwise trigger a large capital gains tax event. You don't want to liquidate that stuff. First of all, philosophically, and second of all, from a tax perspective, it becomes really difficult. But then finding ways to pull value out of that without putting the asset at undue risk, and then taking the income, taking the fiat off of that and generating some income off of that you can then consume, but doing that in tax advantage ways.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Then when it is time to start diversifying out of your Bitcoin, either running option strategies. I know John Devine was just on your program, and running options on there and really carefully structured options, so you don't get called out and get called short. And it's like you don't want to be a forced liquidator, you don't want to be a forced seller, but structuring those conservatively, where you're actually getting a little bit off of those things, maybe getting new Bitcoin off of those yields, off of those returns, and then selling the new Bitcoin at the higher capital gains tax basis. I mean, at your highest tax basis. And then if you do want to sell some of the low basis Bitcoin, then going into some tax advantage strategies that often do get back into philanthropy planning, things like a charitable remainder trust that would allow you to basically give away the future value of the Bitcoin, but then allow you to sell the Bitcoin in a tax exempt environment and defer the income tax on the sale over a period of time versus all at once. And so we don't want to kind of shoehorn clients into a charitable strategy if they don't have charitable intent. I mean, because then they're just going to have buyer's remorse on that. But if the clients say, you know what, I do want to earmark some of this wealth for philanthropic purposes, even into a family foundation to be managed later, you could take sleeves of Bitcoin over time and put that into a strategy called a charitable remainder trust. You get a tax deduction for a kind of a computed value when you establish this thing. Let's say you put $10 million of effectively zero basis Bitcoin into this type of trust structure. If you were to just sell that $10 million worth of Bitcoin, you're going to have full capital gains tax on the 10 million this year. On the other hand, if you put the $10 million worth of Bitcoin into something like a charitable remainder trust, then depending on how old you are when you structure this thing and depending on how the design works, those trusts might last for the remainder of your lifetime. They might last for 20 years, something like that, but it lasts for a long time. You put the 10 million bucks of the Bitcoin into this charitable remainder trust, then at some point you say, you know what, let's sell that Bitcoin. Well, that moment of sale is not a taxable event. That moment of sale takes place in a tax-exempt charitable trust. And then for that 20-year payout, that's a payout back to you. You are, whenever you take distributions off of that charitable remainder trust, then you're paying the income tax off of the sale incrementally. You're stretching out the tax recognition over this 20-year period of time. And then at the end of that 20-year period, whatever's left goes to the charities that you've selected. So it allows you to kind of force yourself into an annuity of sorts, but you can create, we do this to a certain degree with some of our crypto clients. Like we've got this, whether it's airdrop stuff, pre-mine ETH, whether it's, early Bitcoin, mined Bitcoin, whatever, you can put those in this type of structure. If you're philanthropic, take a deduction this year, and then recognize the capital gains tax liability over a much longer period of time, so you don't just have this huge tax hit.
So I got one more good question for you, and then I'll let you close up with any other thoughts that you want to, anything else you want to discuss, we can talk about. But this kind of goes back to what we talked about with legacy and thinking about the future. In a Bitcoin native world, how might we redefine the idea of legacy beyond just financial wealth? How do you help clients think about passing on not just their assets, but also their values, philosophies, and knowledge to the world? Yeah,
a great question. I love that. I think it starts with a lot of self-discovery with Bitcoiners, and we try to facilitate that. We try to help with that, and often when we're sitting down with people, they tell us, nobody's ever asked us those questions before. What is it? What is it all about? What does this money mean? There is no right answer to that question, so long as you've thought about it. And so, okay, well, to the people that you love, do they know that about you? What got you into Bitcoin in the first place? It takes a level of curiosity to engage in questions and engage in conversations with clients, and it takes the ability to slow down and honestly, Maddie, just be authentically interested in the answer. For a lot of our Bitcoiners in particular, it comes down to a matter of responsibility. As we talked about a few times today, Bitcoin is responsibility. Bitcoin is accountability. But for the 21 million hard cap, but for the block reward schedule, Bitcoin isn't Bitcoin. It is the rules, and it is the agreed upon terms that kind of imbue the sense of responsibility.
Consensus protocol.
Yeah, that imbues.
Great name for a company, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. But that imbues value to the blockchain and thus the assets on that blockchain. And so our Bitcoiners, they got into Bitcoin because of that, because you can't print more, you can't make it faster. Wars don't make sense funded by Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Irresponsibility irresponsibility and Bitcoin just don't, they just don't go together.
This idea of absolute scarcity is
right. Exactly.
Interesting one.
And so those are values that they have an origin with the client somewhere. They were either raised that way, or it's part of a faith perspective, like I said, or it's just a sense of abundance now because they just happened to be curious enough, bought it, and then it mooned on them. It's like, okay, well now, how do we pass this wealth on in ways that express our values to the people who weren't there at ground zero for us? Like, it's not just a one-time conversation. It has to be part of the culture of the family's wealth. And it's got to be part of the culture, frankly, of the wealth management team that is supporting the families. Because look, at the end of the day, we're all gonna slip off this mortal coil at some point. I mean, there's a 100% mortality rate. So we know that we will leave stuff behind. We know that we will leave people behind. what is more important? The stuff is important. That's why we work. That's why we're in Bitcoin, is because of all these values and because there's a monetary incentive that goes along with those values. I'm not naive enough to think that, but the people are even more important. I want to make sure that my kids are mature, prepared, and protected to receive whatever wealth they get, whether it's through life insurance, whether it's through real estate, whether it's through Bitcoin. And so it's just a matter of deep discovery with clients and then baking that in to the structures, but then realizing that the strategies, the documents themselves, that's just like the scaffolding around which the family wealth structure is built. The family wealth structure is built brick by brick, block by block over time to add the family's values and kind of bake that in. And as I mentioned earlier, as it gets appropriate for the kids, then bringing the kids into the discussion as they get older. You're doing it through sports right now. Well, what are you teaching your kids through sports? You're teaching them hard work. You're teaching them that life sometimes sucks. Sometimes you're sitting the bench. Sometimes you get punched in the nuts. I mean, all that stuff. Sometimes you sweat. Sometimes you puke. Sometimes you get hurt. Sometimes the other team is just better than you are. But sometimes when you lock arms with your teammates, then you can really do something special. You're teaching those values through sports right now. And there's wonderful lessons that can be learned there. You have to do the same thing with family wealth as well. Why does dad go to work? Why is dad so passionate about this? Why does dad have these machines running in his office all the time? Why is dad up all hours of the night talking to these weirdos about Bitcoin?
Oh man, it's like you hit the nail on the head. It's so funny.
Yeah, dude, I'm there. I mean, I'm there. Yeah, I don't have
that book. That's like it's like a kid's book. It's like, Mommy, why is there a miner in the house or something like that?
No, I haven't seen that.
But or something that's funny. It's like classic funny.
It's honestly it's about communication. I mean, when Bitcoin started really tearing, I got into Bitcoin. I think my cheapest Bitcoin is around $3,000. And I stack every week. I mean, I've been paid a lot in Bitcoin, which has been great. I saved every sat.
Nice.
I stack sats truly every week. And it's, when it became not just economically meaningful, but also just like a material portion of our family's wealth, I somewhat kind of sheepishly had to explain to my wife, this is what it is. This is how it works. I mean, she knew I was in the Bitcoin space and she knew we had some Bitcoin, but it's like she had no idea on how consequential it had become. And I said, look, this is what's going on. And she, to her credit, she said, well, what's the exit path for this? I said, well, I don't know that there is one. I said,
the exit path is when you want to sell, you won't have to. That's right.
That's right. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
But no, I told her, I said, look, when I find an asset class that makes more sense, that I understand better, and that I think has a better opportunity to outperform Bitcoin as a long-term store of family wealth, then I'll consider that. 5 years on, I haven't seen it. So doesn't mean it doesn't exist or won't be created, but it doesn't exist yet, I don't think. But it's a matter of being open and communicating. So if you've got a partner, you got a spouse, you got kids, they need to know that they need to know about it. They need to know that it's important to you. They need to know why it's important to you. If it's just about number go up, be honest about that. If it's beyond more than number go up, then what is it? And then have those conversations, because the values that draw most people into Bitcoin are values that are deeper than number go up, which that's a great side effect. I mean, I'm a fan, but it's these other things we've talked about. It's stewardship, it's responsibility, it's accountability, it's integrity, and Bitcoin is one way of manifesting that. But as you're doing with your kids in sports, there are lots of other ways to manifest that too. And so the family wealth conversation has to center around those values. Those are the things, those are the truths that we hold to be self-evident. And that's what we need to bake into our families.
I can really feel your passion about what you do, and it's nice to meet other people who are in different niches of the Bitcoin world, and the crypto world, where they have really passionate about where they're at and what they do. So, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we nod off here?
I mean, I think we've just kind of landed on it. I mean, I think just to kind of put a bow on it all, Bitcoin specifically, and crypto more broadly. I'm not a total anti-crypto guy, but this asset class is way too important to be cavalier about it. If we think we're going to outrun the tax authorities, if we think we're going to outrun the Grim Reaper, or we're going to outrun regulation on this, we're fooling ourselves. Bitcoin is becoming mainstream. It kind of has become mainstream. And I'm not even talking about the ETFs. I'm talking about Bitcoin. I'm talking about the tokens. If we want this asset class to really provide value to not just our families, but to society, we've got to plan responsibly around it. And that means letting our perspective on key control mature, go to the next level. It's not an all or nothing proposition. You should always.
I think it's, again, to your point, what you just said, it's not an all or nothing problem. I mean, you don't have to put everything in one basket.
Absolutely.
Diversify. You can still maintain control. I mean,
yeah.
If
we're going to go for pints after this, and we find a bar that's going to take sats for beers, it's on me, no problem. Because it's like I've got some that I can control unilaterally. It's easy. But for me, it's like if I get hit by a bus and my wife or kids can't access that Bitcoin, kind of sucks, but it's not the end of the world.
Yeah,
because the biggest stack is secured and cold storage, multi-party, in an offshore trust structure. Can we still access it? Yeah, absolutely. Do I have key control? No, I had to give that up because I don't plan on selling that. My wife doesn't plan on selling that. I think Bitcoin is going to significantly appreciate in dollar-denominated terms, in part because the value of the dollar continues to erode.
I mean, just from a fundamental perspective, I mean, if you don't think the government, the U.S. government, and it's going to, look at the deficit and debt we're in. I mean, you don't think they're going to hit that printer button and just print up trillions like they did during COVID? I mean, you're deluding yourself. I mean, and it's got a hard capped, absolutely scarce asset that is like, the best performing asset in all of human history. And then you've got this other asset that the government's just, they want to go to war, they print. They want to, solve COVID, they print. They want to do this, they print. They oh shit, we wasted money on this, we print.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, it's a no brainer. It's a fundamental no brainer there.
Yeah. I mean, it's, it's just, and you kind of point on the devaluation of the dollar. It's like, this is a super silly kind of perspective, but it's like, you go look at a new Ford pickup truck or Chevy pickup truck on the dealership. You're going to find a Denali pickup truck. It's like $90,000. Is that truck really worth $90,000? Is it worth that much more really in absolute terms than a comparable model in 1985 was? Probably not. Is the dollar just that much more eroded? Most likely.
It's funny that you brought this up because me and John, we had the conversation, John Devine, we literally, this came up in our conversation the other day. And I told him I actually found a receipt. And my grandfather died before I was born, never really got to meet him. But I found one of his receipts for a car he had bought at a Chevrolet. It's like a Chevy pickup. I can't remember what it was, but it was like, but it was like $600. It was like either $600 or $800 cash, just like $600 cash, brand new car.
Yeah,
I think
crazy.
60s or something.
Crazy,
50s, 60s, 70s. I mean, something like that. It was just crazy.
Well, Bitcoin's going up, dollar value is going down. Yeah. This is an asset that is worth taking seriously. It is probably the asset that is worth taking more seriously than any other asset. You got to plan for it. You got to plan for it. And I think it's imperative that we come to terms with why does it matter? Why does this asset matter? What do we want the people that we leave behind to know about us and to know about the world? And how do we want them to express themselves in the world? And then how do we create strategies that move them toward that? There's no one strategy. There's no one combination of strategies. Everyone has to be tailored to the family, which is why we call ourselves Bespoke. Everything that we do, everything that we advise has to be tailored to the family. I think that's kind of the ribbon I'd like to put on this is just take it seriously.
Matt McClintock, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.